Hello and welcome to this session. Help, my student is stuck at Sound by Sound reading. My name is Kim Jenkins and I'm joined by my colleague Andra Bell. We are excited to facilitate this session for everyone. Just those few last minute housekeeping things before we start. The handouts for the session are available at the Patent Literacy Symposium and are housed on Schoology. The session handouts are in the folder for today's date, June 12th, in the time slot for this session. The session is 75 minutes long and it is being recorded. The chat feature will be off between participants, but you will be able to chat with us if you have a question or problem. Please keep your video feature off and mute yourself to eliminate any potential distractions to the presentation. Please type your questions in the chat box or the question and answer feature. Questions will be answered at various times throughout the presentation and at the end if time permits. We would love for you to tweet out or share on social media all that you're learning at the Literacy Symposium. The hashtag for the symposium is hashtag PALitSymposium 2020. And now we would like to introduce you to Michael Hunter. In 2001, Michael's focus shifted from concrete construction to concrete instruction when he left his position as president of his company to pursue a career in helping students learn to read using the most effective methods available. His passion for teaching struggling readers grew from volunteering to teach adults to read in Washington, D.C. Methods traditionally used in adult education did not work, so he looked for other programs. Michael was fortunate to meet Dr. Louisa Moats, who steered him towards explicit instruction, systematic instruction that was immediately effective. He now enjoys all his opportunities to assist learning readers of any age and ability. Michael is co-author with Linda Farrell of Phonics Splits, First Edition, Phonics Boost, and the Diagnostic Decoding Surveys. At this time, I'd like to introduce Michael Hunter.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited. I just got an echo, but I think it's gone now. Okay. So help. My student is stuck at Sound by Sound reading. I presume if you are here, you are experiencing that. You have some struggling readers who seem to be able to accurately decode words sound by sound, but have to do it sound by sound. We're going to explore what that is about and then how to fix it. Before we get started, there are handouts up on the posting. I think they said Schoology. The way our handouts work is that if you see a red title on the slide on the screen, that slide is not in the handout packet, but most of the slides will be in the handout packet for you. If it's a purple title, it should be in the packet. There are also going to be some supplementary handouts at the back of the PDF that I'll refer to as we go through, and I'll point those out to you so you know what you have. And let's get started. So we're going to first talk about the fact that there are a subset of struggling students, struggling readers who get stuck at the sound by sound decoding stage, figure out what the heck is going on, the nature of the problem, and then I'll show you how we go about fixing it. So let's start with describing the sound by sound problem. Sound by sound reading is actually a natural stage. We want students who are very beginning readers to sound out each letter and blend them to read the word, because that's when we teach them to pay attention to each letter and that they understand that each letter is spelling a sound, and that's the function of it in the word. So sound by sound reading by itself is not a problem, and often it's an error correction tool. If a student is struggling reading a single syllable word or a syllable within a multi-syllable word, we might have them touch each letter, say the sound, and then blend to read the word accurately. So sound by sound reading in and of itself is not a problem. The problem becomes when a student can't move past that stage naturally and start reading whole word and not having to sound things out to be accurate. And that's the student we're talking about. We first became aware of this as we worked with schools who were doing good intervention. It seemed like every school that we worked with, most of the kids were moving forward, but then there was always a small group that you know, people might call treatment resistant. They just got stuck at this stage. They had been, had good intervention up to this stage. They got stuck at this stage and didn't move forward. And at first we weren't sure why that was happening and how to fix it. But with work, we've figured some stuff out. So most students and a few students, most beginning readers naturally move from the sound by sound decoding to the whole word on their own because they figure out it's easier. If once you can do it, if you look at a whole word and you can just sound it out in your head, or not even have to sound it, you just see it and think it, that's easier than having to go b, at, bat to read the word. But some kids do seem to get stuck at that initial stage of having to sound out each letter before they can read the word. Now, we are talking about students here who can accurately do that. A student who looks at BAT and goes b-at, fly, is not who we're talking about. That student needs work at the phonological level on how to blend sounds without print before they come to print, because they're just simply guessing the word. But a student who looks at bat and goes b-at, bat, is who we're talking about. But we're talking about the student who has to do that every time they get to an unfamiliar word to read it. Often these are the students who also will have sounded out the word bat in the first sentence, they get to the word bat in the next sentence, and they'll sound it out again like they've never seen it before. And there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that when we get into what's going on. Okay, so that I hope gives you some idea about who we're talking about. The key here is that students are not ready to fix this sound by sound problem if they're still inaccurate when they do the sound by sound reading. That's a different issue. We're talking about the student who is accurate most of the time when they do this, but still has to do it. So accuracy is critical. They have to be accurate, and we're talking about the ones that get stuck there at doing it accurately, but doing it out loud. And what they can't do is think it in their head. We worked with one of our first students that helped us understand this problem was a student named Darby. She was a 5th grader and stuck at this stage still. And when we asked her to just look at the word and think it, figure it out in your head before you say it out, anything out loud, she said, I can't, it hurts. Now, we don't think it actually physically hurt. We think that was her way of expressing that it's just too hard. Some students get stuck at this sound by sound stage simply because it's comfortable. They know they'll get the word right, and they just don't want to make a mistake. And so they get stuck here because it's just, I know if I do this, I'm going to get it right, and I don't like to get things wrong. And those are easy to fix because you just encourage them to think it in your head before you say it, and they very quickly figure out, oh, I can still get it right, and it's easier, and they move on. That's pretty easy to fix. You just encourage them to do it. When it's not easy to fix is the students we're talking about who just say, like Darby, I can't, it's too hard, or it hurts. And those are the students we're here to talk about, and what we need to do to make them be able to allow them rather to be able to do that in their head. So here's what our analysis of the sound by sound reading problem is. Let's start with a normal student, reader, doing a word silently, reading a word. The student sees the word in text, and they see the word, and they think the word. So they see encyclopedia, they just think encyclopedia. They're not even aware of any kind of process going on to read the word because it's automatized. If we ask that same student to read that word out loud, they see the word in text, they think the word, and then they say the word. And it happens almost simultaneous, almost instantaneous, doesn't require any effort. But here's what happens. We call the sound by sound syndrome issue, sometimes we call it the Darby syndrome after that student Darby who helped us figure this out, what was going on. And here's what we think is going on. Student like Darby, or a sound by sound student, sees the word in text. They don't see the whole word, they see a string of letters. So they see the first letter and they focus on that. They say the sound that that letter represents, that it spells. They say it out loud. They hear themselves say the sound. So the sound comes back into their brain through their ears, and then they can hold that sound in their working memory. They look at the next letter in the string of letters that they're seeing instead of the whole word. They say the sound, they hear the sound, they hold the sound in memory. They see the third letter, they say the sound, they hear the sound, they hold the sound in memory. And then finally, they can blend the sounds that they have heard through their own ear from reading the letters and say the whole word. And you will usually observe at the time that they do this, when they blend the sounds and say the whole word, they are no longer looking at the print. They're either looking up in the air or looking at you, and they are not reading the word. They're blending sounds that they've given themselves. So they've turned the reading process into a process that they've learned how to do well, which is an oral task of blending given sounds. And because they look away from the print, they're not processing the word as a whole. They're processing it as a string of letters to produce sounds that then become a whole word. So what we think is going on here is that the student is not able to see the whole word, process the sounds that the letters spell, the pattern that they're reading, and as a whole thing, and hold all of that in their memory. So these are students who can't process a whole word orally, compare it to another word orally, and make a substitution. And we're going to talk about that in a minute because that's critical. So what they have to do, instead of seeing a whole word, quickly thinking the sounds and producing the whole word, they have to go piece by piece. And this is why when they read a sentence and they sound out bat, for instance, in sentence 1, and they get to sentence 2 and they see bat again, it is a brand new word for them because they've never processed the word as a whole. It's just a string of letters, and here's another string of letters I have to sound out and then turn into an oral blending process as opposed to an internal mental blending process. So we thought initially that the sound by sound students were struggling orthographically. We thought it was an orthographic, a print issue, because that's where it was showing up. And they were able to do the phonological task of blending sounds orally, if they were provided the sounds, easily and accurately. So it didn't seem like it was a phonological problem. But what we now know is that these students have some weakness still in their phonological processing. They've gotten to the level of blending and segmenting just fine, maybe not easily, but they're there and they can do it accurately and easily. But they also probably have a little bit of orthographic weakness. They probably had trouble initially learning their letter names and sounds. It took longer than it might for a non-struggling reader. And so they still got a little bit of deficit on both sides, both the phonological processor and the orthographic processor, that's preventing the whole process from melding together and becoming automatic in reading whole words. So the student that's stuck at the sound by sound reading cannot think the sounds without saying them out loud. They have to say it out loud to access and process the sounds that the letters are spelling. They don't pay attention to the letters because they turn the sounds into an oral that they hear out loud as opposed to in their brain. And then while they're blending, they're not looking at the letters, so they're never building what we call the mental orthographic image. They're not building a sight word out of any of these words that they're reading over and over again because they're never processing the word as a whole, as a unit of print. They're processing individual letters, and they'll never become fluent, obviously, at that stage. So at this point, I hope we have a sense of what who we're talking about and what's going on. I'm going to show you a video of my business partner, Linda, and she is working with Callista. And Callista is a sound by sound reader. And while you watch the video, this is about a 16-minute video, I think, guys. So you're going to see a whole series of things happening here, a lesson. But I think once you see this, you will understand what needs to be done. And then all I have to do is kind of review. It's so much more powerful when you see it in action. So it's worth the time on a video. But while you watch the video, I want you to watch for Linda working with phonological awareness. She's going to make sure that the student knows the vowel sounds, has no confusion about short vowel sounds. She's going to encourage the student to think the sounds instead of orally saying them when manipulating sounds without print. And then she's going to have her do some basic decoding skills where she also has to think the sounds before reading the word out loud, and then practice reading fluently with 100% accuracy. So those are the things I want you to watch as you go through this. Linda had not met Callista before. We had assessed Callista, so we knew what her problem was, but this is the first time Linda worked with her. It's one session taped from beginning to end with just some pieces edited out. There was no go back and redo, so you're seeing live on the ground teaching and learning happening, and Callista was a first grader. So
what do we call that vowel sound? And you say short O. You got it.
Callista is in first grade at Windy Hill Elementary School in Calvert County, Maryland. She's an early stage reader who sounds out letters accurately, and she can blend those letters together to form words.
Callista, could you please read this column?
Id, did, ad, al, pal, gum.
Reading expert Linda Farrell is helping Callista take the next step toward fluent reading, reading each word as a whole rather than one sound at a time. Their time together will include work on short vowel sounds, blending and manipulating sounds, reading whole words, and fluency. Ms. Farrell starts by making sure Callista has a strong foundation in her short vowel sounds.
Okay, we're going to learn some motions. Can you hold an apple in your hand? And when I ask you the short A sound, you're going to say, ah. Say it.
Ah.
Now watch me. Ah. Pull. You do it.
Ah. Pull.
Okay, that is going to remind you of the short A sound. That's our motion. So say, ah.
Ah.
And when I ask you what the short A sound is, you're going to go, ah. Do it.
Ah.
Okay, for short E, go like this. Watch me. Go edge.
Edge.
So we want to start out by making sure she's solid with her short vowel sounds. So that's the first thing we did. And she did know her, when I said what short A, she knew it. She had to think a little bit. So what we did is we want her to, when she can't remember the vowel sound real easily, we want to not have to give it to her. We want her to have a scaffold to learn it. So we taught Callista the motions that go with the vowel sounds so that if she can't remember a vowel sound, what is the short O sound? Then all she has to do, I can go like this and remind her, or she can go, oh, it's octopus. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go to short O. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go. Octopus. Do it.
Octopus.
Now we're not going to say the octopus part. We're just going to say ah. What's the short O sound?
Ah.
And make the motion. Ah. What's the short A sound?
Ah.
Short O?
Ah.
Okay, now we're going to learn short U. Are you ready for short U? Up. Do it.
Up.
And the first sound in up is What's the short U sound? Short A?
Ah.
Short O?
Ah.
Short U? The vowel motions that we teach are purposefully motions. They aren't static. Because if I say you can hardly hear the difference between those sounds. And children who have phonological awareness difficulties, which is the biggest problem in reading issues, they don't hear the vowel sounds easily. Listen to this. A, e, ah, they sound different. So we want to encourage the children not to say ah. We want them to say ah. Therefore, the motion that we use, which is holding an apple, and then move it across the front of your body, left to right, motion of reading, ah, and then pull is what the rest of the word is, but we only say the first sound. Everything encourages them to draw out that sound. Okay, now we're going to learn short I. Are you ready for short I? Okay, watch this. I went stomping. I went hiking and I stomped and tromped in some poison ivy, and boy do I itch. Do it. Do this. Itch. Do it. Itch. Now you have to smile real big when you say itch. Go itch. Okay, do it again. Short I sound. Itch. Okay, and itch is the guide word. I made a mistake. I should have told you that I is just like this. I. We don't even say the ch part. Just do this. I. What's the short I sound?
I. I.
Make it go I.
I.
What's the short A sound?
Ah.
Short I.
I.
Short I.
I.
Short A.
Ah.
Short O.
Oh.
Short U. You know your short vowel sounds. Callista was very confident with her vowel sounds. She knew them. I would still have worked on them a little bit more, but she was confident enough for me to move on to the next step. So the next step with a kid who's reading sound by sound isn't really intuitive. It's often a phonological problem. It isn't a problem with the letters. The kid knows the letters. I know the letter sounds. I can blend the letter sounds into a real word. What they aren't doing is thinking the sounds in their mind. They're turning that word, if it's hug. They look at it and they go, g. And they are never getting the full visual picture of that word. To them, it's always an H-U-G, an h-g, not hug. So they haven't moved to where they can read the whole word without breaking it into phonics. And that's a step that we're going to have to teach her to do, which is one of my favorite things to do, because they just go from being really slow readers to just being normal readers once they can get this phonological representation. We're going to do something that we call sound chaining. Okay? I'm going to show you how it works. So I say, Miss Linda, show me the sounds in lip. So I go, O, I, P, lip. You touch and say.
U, I, P, lip.
Okay, what's the first sound in lip?
L.
L is the name of the letter. What's the sound?
Ooh.
What's the next sound in lip?
I.
I is the name of the letter. What's the sound?
I.
Okay, and when I ask you, you point to it, okay? So what's the first sound in lip?
Ooh.
What's the next sound in lip?
I.
And the last sound in lip? P. And what's the
Lip.
word? Okay, so that's lip. If I want to change lip to sip, I take out the O and I put in a S. Touch and say sip.
I. Sip.
What if I want to change sip to tip?
You take away this one and add
Okay,
this
so what
one.
did I take out? Sip to tip. Say sip to tip.
sip to tip.
Which one did I take out? If this is sip, take out.
The s and add the t.
Okay, now I want to change tip to Tim. So let's touch and say tip.
I. Tip.
Now touch and say Tim.
I. Tim.
Which one's different?
The last one.
So what do I take out of tip to change
last
tip to
one.
Tim? And what sound do I take out?
P.
P is the name of the letter. What's the sound? Okay, take it out. And what do I put in to make it Tim?
M.
M is the name of the letter. What's the sound? Okay, so now I've got Tim. Touch and say Tim.
Tim.
I want to change Tim to Tom. When we work with sound by sound children, we make sure that they know the difference between letters and sounds and that they can manipulate sounds. Once they can blend and segment sounds confidently, we move to manipulating. How do we do that? We work with colored tiles. They don't have letters on them because we want the child to have no distraction with letters. What we want is the child to be thinking about sounds. Touch and say tap.
App. Tap.
Can you change tap to tape?
Miss Farrell gives Callista plenty of quiet time to think about which sounds are changing.
Let's check that, because one thing you did right is there's always only one tile that changes. Let's touch and say tap.
App. Tap.
Touch and say tape.
Ape. Tape.
Which one's different?
The middle.
Yeah, what sound do you take out of tap?
A.
A is the name of the letter. What sound do you take out of tap?
Ah.
Okay, take it out. And what sound do you put in to make tape?
E.
Say tape.
Ape.
Say, touch and say.
Ape. Tape.
What sound was that?
A.
It was A. Okay, so you put in the sound A. If I want to change tape to take, which one do I change?
This one.
Yes. What sound do I take out of tape?
P.
What sound? Yeah. Okay, and what sound do I put in to make it take? Now, this time, when I ask you to make the change, keep your mouth closed and think about it, okay? Okay, so don't open your mouth. You can think the sounds in your head. So we've got take to make. Okay, look down. You can look down. Take to make. Can you say take to make?
Take to make.
Okay, which one changes? Keep your mouth closed. Don't. You have to think the sounds, okay? Okay, so take out t. And what are you going to put in for make? What sound? Okay, can you change? Now again, mouth closed. Okay, but I'm going to ask you to say make to mate. Say that. Make to mate.
To mate.
Okay, close your mouth and think about which one. When you know, touch it. Okay, what sound comes out of make? Take it out. What sound goes in for mate? Okay. One of the things Callista does is I say, what's the first sound? And she gives me the name of the letter. And we've got to get sound by sound children to think in terms of there are letter sounds and there are letter names. Because the name of the letter, the first letter in phone is P, but the first sound in phone is F. And if she doesn't get the difference automatically and quickly, she'll always be struggling with reading. It's easy to teach. It's no big deal. And I think that you see Callista make great strides in her reading. Back and start again.
Now we're at the point where Miss Farrell will push Callista to a higher level of reading, from reading words sound by sound to reading whole words.
Could you please read this column?
Did, add, pal, gum, it, kit.
Students who read sound by sound see a letter, make it a sound, see a letter, make it a sound, see a letter, make it a sound. So this is what's happening. What that keeps her from being able to do is develop a visual imprint of words and word patterns on her brain. And you never look at the word as a whole. We're trying to get Calista to look at the word as a whole, as opposed to looking at it letter by letter by letter. Now what I'd like you to do is I want you to go back and this time keep your mouth closed before and think the sounds and don't open your mouth until you know what the word is and can read it, okay?
Did,
Keep going.
add, pal, and mud.
Okay. Phew, you got pretty good there, didn't you? Closing your mouth.
You can sense the wheels turning in Calista's mind as she works silently to sound out the letters and put the sounds together into a word. Next comes work on fluency.
Start right here.
Can the lad.
Okay, now go back and read it again.
Can the lad.
Now, can you go back and read it? Can the lad? Okay, read it.
Can the lad
Okay.
be in the mud?
Okay, read it like you'd say it.
Be in the mud.
Okay, now read the whole sentence.
Can the lad be in the mud?
Okay, can you read that one?
Kim was hot and got a fan. Kim was hot and got a fan.
Okay, we're gonna go and read a couple of sentences now. Those were phrases and they turned into sentences. Could you please read this sentence?
Gus got mud on the rug.
Okay, and now we're gonna go read passage. Okay, what's the title?
Don and Pip.
Okay,
Don was a lad. Pip was a pup. Don and Pip had a one. The sun was hot.
she was getting faster as she closed her mouth. She made more mistakes than she would make if she read sound by sound. She didn't make that many mistakes, but she did make more mistakes. But that's okay, because that's what happens when you start changing a habit, is you go backwards a little bit. She'll eventually, and I think fairly quickly, be a much faster reader and a much more proficient reader. Do you ever read a book that you like? Calista made a lot of progress in this lesson, and she is on her way to being a top-notch reader.
We'd like to thank the wonderful students and families at Windy Hill Elementary School in Calvert County, Maryland. We hope that sharing these experiences will help other children who are learning to read. Special thanks also to Kelly Cleland, Julie Donovan, Joanne Harbaugh, and their outstanding colleagues at Windy Hill Elementary, and to Leanne Meisinger at Calvert County Public Schools. We are deeply grateful to Linda Farrell, Michael Hunter, and Nicole Lubar of Readsters for their invaluable contributions to this project.
Okay. I think now might be a chance to answer a question or two before we go into the debriefing on the rest of this.
Okay, hi, yes, we have a bunch of people have asked if you could share what materials, what resources Linda was using in that video.
Okay, sure. those are, the book that she was using is from Phonics Plugin 1, which is a set of lessons that we publish at Readsters. So if you go to our website, readsters.com, www.readsters.com, you can find out more information about it, or you can email me. But the video is not to push the materials. It just happened to be what we used.
Good question. As Kalisa was reading the phrases with Linda, she was not pointing to the words as she read. Is there research that shows reading is better with pointing or some way of tracking?
I don't know about the research, but what I know is that for students who need to point, it works. What you will find is pointing is helpful for students who are having trouble keeping their eyes down on the words, focusing on it. My experience is I encourage it at first, and then what I find typically is that once the students don't need it, they drop it automatically. But I work with older students who need it. I say touch each word as you read. And then again, as I say, once they don't need it, they drop it. But no, I want students, and we're going to talk here in a little bit about keeping their eyes on the word. And if it helps them keep their eyes and keep their tracking and keep their focus, absolutely use it. And as they become more proficient and fluent, it'll naturally disappear. Okay, shall we go on and we'll pick up some more questions. I'm going to do my best to leave some time for more questions. Okay, so you saw several things going on in that video, and that's why I wanted to show the whole thing. When I worked with, when I do work with schools that are experiencing kids that are stuck at this sound by sound stage, when I first started discovering this and we were figuring out what to do, I put together a one-page sort of instruction sheet or cheat sheet, if you will, as a reminder of the things that you need to work on to fix these students. And you saw, what you'll see is you saw Linda work with most, not quite all of these that are on this list. But this, if you have access to the handouts, this is the last page in the handout in the PDF, and it's my one-pager for what to do with sound by sound readers. And if you have that, you will see that there are 3 domains that you need to work in. And you will work in these simultaneously not at the same moment, but within a lesson. So you're going to do some work in phonemic awareness, which is what you saw Linda doing some work at the beginning of the video. What you did not see Linda do was working on any weak orthographic skills. Interestingly enough, Kalisa, when we assessed her, was unusual in that she didn't have BD confusions. We find that most sound by sound kids still have BD confusions and maybe some other letter sound confusions. So that's one thing you might have to work on. So if they were slow to learn their letters, they may well be slow to learn those high frequency, irregularly spelled high frequency words that we call heart words, that that involve some memorization, because they have spelling patterns that don't spell what they should. And then the third domain is the basic decoding skills. And you did see Linda quickly run through working on reading first words in isolation, then phrases, then sentences, and then finally a decodable text. So those are the 3 things that you're going to work on. I recommend that you do some work in each of those that you need to in a given lesson, if you have time, so that they're getting fixed on all 3 fronts as you move forward. So let's go through the sheet and talk about some of the pieces. So the first one, the first domain is phonemic awareness. Now remember that a sound by sound reader is accurate at blending and segmenting 2 to 3 sounds and maybe even 4. If they can't do 4 sounds easily and accurately, that's fine. You can continue to build the skill with orally blending and segmenting 4 sounds. That sets them up for reading blends. They will not work on reading blends yet, but you can pre-teach dealing with 4 sounds ahead of their work with blends. You saw Linda work with vowel sounds. teaching the vowel sounds, and we believe it's very important to teach the labels for the vowel sounds because those are the words that the teacher uses when teaching phonics. We teach that, you know, the vowel consonant E, silent E pattern spells the long vowel sound. And we would say that I, consonant E, spells the long I sound. And the students need to, when they hear that label, short A, they need to immediately, without having to search for it, think ah. And that's what you saw Linda beginning the practice to automatize that process for Callista. And what you didn't see Linda do, and I'm going to model for you in a moment, is listening for vowel sounds in spoken words and then labeling them. And we use a routine called stretching to segment the sounds, and then we ask questions. At the same time, we need to make sure the students can recognize and hold in memory first sound, last sound, and middle sound in 3 sound words, because that's part of the key to being able to do the manipulation piece, the sound chaining, which is the most important piece that the students are going to need to be able to do, which is what you saw Linda beginning to build with the colored tiles. So those are the things we need to do. So let's look at, first of all, teaching the vowel sounds, because I think most people know how to do teaching, blending, and segmenting 2, 3, and 4 sounds and making sure those are solid. We at Reesters divide the vowel sounds into 4 categories, and on page 12 in the handouts there's a one page that has these 4 categories with these pictures. We have the short vowel sounds, the long vowel sounds, the R-controlled sounds, or, and R, and then anything that isn't short, long, or R-controlled we call other, and that includes oi, ow, oo, and So those are the categories. You saw Linda teaching Callista the motion to go with the sound. Now the motions are based on a keyword or a guide word. So for short A, the guide word is apple, and the motion was to pretend to hold an apple in your right, the hand you write with, your dominant hand, move it left to right across in front of your body, and stretch out the first sound that you hear in the word apple, ah. We drop the guide word and focus on having the student just say the sound and make the motion at the same time. They don't have to say a apple, ah, they go ah, and just say the sound and make the motion. And they become, the motion is very powerful for solidifying and linking that sound, but we don't want them to have to go through apple to get to ah. We want them to just use the motion and think the sound and say the sound. So this slide has the motions that you saw Linda do. Octopus is ah, short I is itch. I don't know if you guys can see me. And then edge. I don't think you saw short E, but short E is edge. First we trace the edge of a desk, and then we can just trace in the air because we know that we're thinking about an edge for eh. So those are the short vowel sounds. We actually like to teach students about the long vowel sounds intermixed with learning about the short vowel sounds. But for your sound by sound kids, you want to shore up they should know the short vowel sounds. So you want to shore those up first. And then once they're shored up, you can start moving on to pre-teaching for when they're going to learn to read and spell the long vowel sounds. Teach the sound and the label before they have to learn to read and spell them. And the motions for the long vowel sounds is very simple. It is simply to write the lowercase letter in the air as you say the sound. So long A is A, long I is I, and I think you guys can imagine what long E, O, and U are. Just simply write the motion in the air. We then move to teaching the 3 R-controlled sounds. And now, when we teach the short vowels and the long vowels, each sound has its own label. So long A is long A. It's not just long, it's long A. When you get to the R control, because there are multiple spellings for these sounds, you can't individually label the sound as a particular thing. So all 3 sounds are just called R controlled. So as in bird, or as in horn, and R as in arm. And this is how I make the bird with my hands. I just hook my thumbs and make a bird. or I just pretend to be blowing a horn with my thumb as the mouthpiece. And then R, I make, a muscle arm for R. For other vowel sounds, we have oi, and we just touch our nose and pretend like we're going to give ourselves a piggy nose by pushing it up, but you can just touch your nose and say oi. We frame our hands as a house for ow. We squeeze goop in our hands so it oozes, so ooze. And then for book, we just pretend to open a book. So you have those motions in the slides. You don't teach all of these at once, obviously. Calista already knew her short vowel sounds, so Linda was able to quickly go through all 5. You may need to break it down and teach them and practice them a little more slowly. And then slowly add the rest of the sounds. A suggested scope and sequence for teaching them is in the slides, but basically we would start with a short vowel, and then once we've shored up the short vowels, we'll add the long vowel sounds and then move on to R controlled and other. For teaching, we actually do this for all our students, even not our struggling students, because we think all the kids need to be clear on the vowel sounds. When we teach regular students or not sound by sound students, we might alternate the short and long vowel. So we would teach short A and then long A. And when those are solidified, we would move to short O, long O. But as I said, for your sound by sound kids, we need to make sure that the short vowels, because they're going to be reading those right away. We practice listening for the vowel sounds in spoken words with a routine we call stretching. And hopefully you have video of me so that my camera so that I can model this for you. But stretching is we get in the ready position, we make a fist with our hand and we put it up by our shoulder. And the teacher says the word, both. Student repeats the word, both. Then the student uses, starting with the thumb, stretches out a finger as they say each sound they hear in the word. So for both, it would be b, o, f. And then the student blends the word back together, pulling their fist back in so they go both. Then we would ask if the student needs work and practice with what's the first sound and what's the last sound, we would say, what's the first sound? And the student would say, b. What's the last sound? F. And then we ask, what is the vowel sound? And that's when the student makes the motion and says the sound, O. And then what do we call it? The student gives the label, long O. Okay, I'll do another one for you. Now that you've had me describe it, I'm just going to go through it. So this is an I do. I get ready. My word is math. I repeat, math. Math. The last, and we can mix first and last sound. The last sound is f. The first sound is The vowel sound is a, and we call it short A. In the handout, in the back of the handout, from that phonics plugin materials that Linda was using, we teach this in that set of lessons, and we have a routine, and I've put the pages for the routine, I do, we do, you do, for the stretching routine, sample scripts in the package for you, so you can see how we do it. And we do this small group, it doesn't have to be one-on-one. And so you have that in the packet. Also in the packet, you have some, no, not yet, sorry. That's what's in the packet. You'll have to generate your own words, vowel list. Okay, let's move to the most important part of the phonemic, because I want to make sure we have time to cover everything. And that is the sound chaining. But in order to sound chain, a student has to be able to blend and segment 2 and 3 sound words easily. And they really need to have an understanding of what first and last sounding words are, because they have to be able to hold the whole word and the individual sounds in their brain. And that's what the sound chaining is going to train them to do. Now, it's interesting to know about this sound chaining. If any of you have read any of David Kilpatrick's research, David Kilpatrick tells us that we have two types of readers. We have normally developing readers and we have struggling readers. And what Kilpatrick's research tells us is that with the struggling readers, they will need explicit instruction and practice in automatizing what we call sound chaining, manipulating sounds in words orally. Normally developing readers develop this ability on their own through print. As they learn to apply the alphabetic principle and decode words, they develop this ability on their own. They're self-learners on this, but the research tells us that the struggling readers will need to if we want them to become fluent, they will need to become automatic and with this ability, but they will need to be taught and have practice with it explicitly. So you saw Linda doing the sound chaining, beginning to do the sound chaining with Callista. Callista will need more work with it because you could see she's a fast learner, I have to say, with Callista. You saw that she sort of quickly cottoned on to what was going on, but she was still having to do a lot of thinking to figure out which sound was changing. She was still getting hung up, as Linda talked about, on thinking about the spelling and not just thinking about the sounds. So there's a fair amount of work that has to be done here, but this is, I call it super mastery of phonemic awareness. It's the ability to think about and manipulate the sounds in spoken words beyond just segmenting and blending. And so it will involve the skills of being able to substitute, which is what you saw Linda doing, change sad to mad. Also to be able to delete. So if we wanted to change Ray to raid, we just drop a sound, we don't substitute a new sound in. And then finally deletion, which is to, I'm sorry, I did that backwards. Deletion would be dropping a sound and not adding it back in. Actually, adding was Ray to raid, where we added a sound, sorry. But I think you get the sense there. And once a student can, when you're doing a sound chain, a substitution is easiest. When you're doing one word at a time, addition and deletion are easy because there's no thinking about whether a sound has to go back in or not. You just either add one or drop it. But when you start doing the chains, you want to teach the students to be able to do all three tasks so that they can change one word to another and then change the next word, as you saw Linda do. This is not with print, guys. This is not a letter chain. That's a good practice, and that's something we also do, but this is without print. This is phonological and phonemic. Practice to mastery is critical. So we start with two sounds. Often we'll start with just two sound changes first to get students used to thinking about it, then moving to three sounds. And I'm not going to go through all of these. I think you got a good sense from the video of how they work. Once students are getting a grasp on this, move them away from thinking about letters by making complicated things like to lick and make to mac and not to note, where the spelling changes, but the sounds are still only one sound changing. Obviously, you're going to need to develop your sound changes to do this, your word list before you actually do this with the students, because trying to do it off the top of your head, you're going to get lost. You need to have a word list. I think during the process in the video, you saw Linda use touch and say. I want to review touch and say now. Touch and say is where students touch either print or, in the case of sound chaining, the color tile that represents the sound and say the sound. We're going to move away from this eventually, but this is how, when we're first learning the process, students touch, and that builds their focus on connecting the object or the letter that's representing the sound, staying focused on it, keeping them in order, you know, it's a multimodal way of working through the process. We're going to remove the manipulatives eventually and get to where students can just do it in their head. That's what we're building for, but you have to build through doing that. So touch and say would be, I touch b, a, th, and then I read the whole word bath, or say the whole word, because I'm not reading, I'm just doing color tiles. You can do it with print as well. So now, with our sound by sound students, once they can do touch and say where they say it out loud, we're going to move to what we call think and say. They still can touch the letter or the manipulative that's representing the sound, but they can't say the sound out loud. They can't sub-vocalize it. They can move their lips around if they need to, but we're going to try to get rid of that eventually. But they can't say it. They have to think it, because that's the piece that they haven't developed, is to be able to do it without saying it out loud. They have to, so they're going to learn to think and say, touch and think. Got a typo there. Okay, so think and say, or touch and think, I guess we're calling it two different things here, would be I touch and think the sound, but I don't say it, and then I say the whole word aloud, either with print or with the tiles. In your handout, again from the materials Linda was using, we do teach this as part of the phonics lessons to make sure that no kids become sound by sound readers. So we have a routine for teaching the sound chains and practicing the sound chains with the color tiles that you saw Linda doing. And I've put in some sample sound changes, word lists, so that you can try this out and play with it. So in the handouts, you've got some materials to work with. I think because we saw the video and I'm looking at my time, I'm going to just quickly go through maybe one here on the slides. Just so the first thing we do is we get the tiles out. We set up with the tiles in order. And if you're working with small group, you're going to want to set the tiles up in order, the same colors every time, so that if you're looking around your group and somebody made a wrong change, you can see it because their tiles will be the wrong color. So we start with green, yellow, red, like a stoplight. So green first, red last, and one tile to the side. That's going to be the one we move in when we do a substitution. So then we start with our first word, in this case the word, now remember the students aren't seeing this print, they're just seeing their color tiles. The word is poke, everyone repeat, poke, touch and say, p-o-k, and then poke. So that's to get us started. And then we do a we do where we all do it together, and we would change poke to soak. We have the students repeat poke to soak, and then we have the students, before they say anything, they think and figure out which sound is going to change, and then we say point, and they point to the sound that's going to change from poke to soak, and then they tell us as they make the child change what sound is going out, what sound is going in, and then finally touch and say the whole word, soak, soak. Okay, so I hope that gives you a little bit of, I'm not going to drag you through a whole chain here to do it. You've got the routine, and unfortunately I have this all animated for you guys to do that, but okay, I think, let's see where we are time. I'm going to hold questions to the end, guys, because I've got a lot more I want to try to cover. Okay, orthographic weaknesses. We need to fix any letter name confusion or sound confusion. BD is a pretty common one that we see in the BD kids. We need to make sure that the students not only know their vowel sounds and labels, but that they also match those short vowel sounds to the letters A, E, I, O, U. And you can be teaching common digraphs at this point if the students don't know them. So those are the things we can do in orthographic. Let me very quickly introduce you to a way we have, the only way I know to fix the BD confusions, which is we make up a practice sheet like this that has 10 letters in a row. half of which are B's and D's, and the other half are letters, other letters. And the student learns about what we call the B hand, and they can either make a fist next to the B that looks like the B, or they can do it with their, excuse me, with their hand like that. So it's either this or this. And they learn to look as, before they read the row going across, they have to hold their hand out next to any D or B, not next to any other letter, check their hand, and if it looks like their hand, their B hand, then it must be a B. If it does not look like their hand, it must be a D. And they practice reading all the letters going across. A, put your hand out next to the D and check. D, because it doesn't look like my B hand. S, put the hand out and check. Does look like my B hand, so it must be B, so on to the end of the row. If they made any errors, we tell them how many they got right. You got 9 right, let's go back. And if it was a B or a D they missed, they have to put their hand out and check. If it's another one of the letters they missed for some reason, we have them try it again, and if need be, we correct them. Then they move to the next row and try again. And their goal is to, with their hand on every B and D checking, get 3 rows right. Once they get 3 rows right, if they go all the way down through 10 rows and don't get 3 right, that's enough practice for one day. They'll come back and try again another day, the next day. If they get their 3 rows right, we're done for the day. Their next goal is to try to get the first 3 they do in a session 100% right, no self-corrections, in a row, the first 3. When they can do that 3 days in a row, we'll take the hand away, and they practice naming the letters, trying to get 3 in a row, 3 rows right, and then 3 in a row, 3 days in a row without their hand. And if they can do that, they've pretty well automatized the BD. They don't have to think. There's a nanosecond that they do in their brain, but they're not even aware of it, checking B's and D's before they name them. And then once the students have gotten past their sound by sound struggle, they can go and do the practice page with words that are a bunch of BD words. They don't need their hand, but they can practice reading B's and D's correctly in words. We do similar practice for other confusing letters. We create a similar sheet. So this is a GJ here. And I put in the handout packet our scaffolds that we've created, or the anchors rather, that we've created for one of each of the pairs that the student confuses. If they come to that letter, they use their anchor. If they come to the other letter, because they know which 2 they're confusing. So if they come to a J, they say J has a dot J. If they come to a G, they just say G because it doesn't have a dot. And then when they can do that accurately with their hand, automatically, then they do it without their hand. So it's the same process. And again, if you have the handouts, guys, the directions are in there. You can create your own practice sheets. We do actually sell packets that have the practice sheets, and you can investigate that on our website if you want. But if you need help setting it up on your own, we can do that for you too. Some students who are sound by sound because of orthographic weakness might struggle with what we call heart words, which are the irregularly spelled high frequency words that involve some memory to learn. And you need to fix and teach any that they need to learn on those. Just recognize, don't do more than 3 to 5 at one time, because they are going to struggle with these and are going to take longer than normally developing student, reader rather, to learn them, because they just need more repetitions. They need to learn to both spell and read them. I've put in your packet, okay, we divide the high frequency words from the 150 most frequent list into what we call heart words, which are the irregularly spelled ones, and then flash words, which are ones that are decodable with a beginning, typical beginning reading, scope and sequence, CVC, digraphs, blends, are controlled, and silent E. We think those words are not words you need to practice in isolation and memorize. You will get them when you start decoding. So your sound by sound kids are only going to be decoding at the CVC level, but they will learn can, get, did once they develop the mental orthographic images of them by reading them over and over again. They don't have to think of them as special words. So that list is in, divided that way is in your packet. When we teach the irregularly spelled ones, we start with having the students think about the sounds in the word. So if the word was said, we say this word is said, everybody say said. We ask them to tell us how many words are in, sounds are in the word said. S, e, d, 3 sounds. And then they look at the word said, and we have them focus on that the S spells what it should, the D spells what it should, what's left that doesn't spell what it should. Those are what we call the heart letters, because you have to learn them by heart. We have them underlined and put a heart over it. That's the memory part of this word that makes it a heart word. Then we have them practice reading and spelling the word aloud. We hide the word, they desk write the word from their memory on the desk. Before they write it, once they've written it, then we ask them questions. What was the last letter in said? What was the first letter in said? What were the heart letters in said? What came after the first letter? What came before the last letter? And all of that is having the students hold the high frequency word image in their head and think about it and imprint it on their, by thinking about it, they're having to hold it long enough to start to build a permanent memory of it. We have them spell it backwards and then forwards. The backward spelling, they have to access that picture in their head of the word. And then of course we finish forward because that's the correct way to spell it. Then we have them write it on a whiteboard so they can fix it if they need to fix it. And then lastly, they can create their own flashcard and underline the heart letters and put a heart over it. And that becomes the word they're going to have in their deck to practice. For fixing high frequency word confusions, we do the same thing that we do essentially with the confusing letters. And we have practice sheet, 10 words on a row. The confusing pair makes up half the words. And they get an anchor or a scaffold, we call it in this case, for the confusing words. Some words lend themselves, like saw, was, we want them to focus on the sound of the first letter so they don't get them confused. So for both words, they have s, underline s as they say s, saw, underline w as they say woo, was. So every time they come to that word, that's what they do. For where were, that pair lends itself to just one word having the scaffold. Where loves H. So if they see were, there's no H, they don't do anything but read were. When they get to where loves H, underlining the WH and read where. They get their mastery, 3 cold reads, 3 days in a row, 100% accurate. Then we take the scaffold away. They've developed mastery without the scaffold, 3 rows right, 3 days in a row. First 3 days in a row. I'm going to have to move quickly for our time here, guys, but we put in the packet directions for the scaffolds that we use for commonly confused high frequency words. If you have a pair that is not on our list and you want us to help you build practice sheets for that, we can do that. Just email us. We also have a pre-built packet on our website that we sell. Now, last piece, decoding. So we work on phonemic awareness, we fix orthographic weaknesses, and then we also work on having the student read, and you saw Linda do this in the video. We have students read CVC words first, and then we can add digraphs and blends as they become more proficient. But while they're first working out, learning to do it in their head, just stick with CVC. Each practice will include several readings of words in isolation, phrases, then sentences, and then finally a decodable book or passage, so that kids are getting lots of practice, lots of exposure to the words. Repeated reading is critical. It's how they're going to develop this mental capacity, this muscle, if you will, in their brain of thinking the sounds instead of having to say them, to read the words. They're also going to build their mental orthographic images of the words. So step 1 is the students have to read without opening their mouth think the sounds, so think and say, but they can't open their mouth or subvocalize. Now at first they may twitch their lips around, but as long as they don't open their mouth, that's allowed. But they cannot whisper or say the sounds, because that's when the sound is going in through their ears, even if it's not loud. So they have to silently, and you saw this in the video, think the sounds, keep your eyes on the word. When you have the word figured out, say it out loud. Now, Callista picked that up very quickly. Often with a sound by sound kid, it may take them 15 seconds the first time to figure it out in their head without saying it out loud. That's fine. Give them that time. It will get faster and faster, but at first they just simply have to do it, and it may be hard for them at first and slow. You have to be patient. This takes a lot of patience on your part to fix this problem, but you will be so happy that you do, because they will become fluent readers. And Callista moved very quickly. Some of your kids will not move that quickly. The next step, after they can twitch and do it, they have to practice not moving their mouth at all. By then, it'll be coming faster and they can start to do it more fluently. You will find every time they reread a list, it will go faster than the first time they did it, and that's why we do lots of rereading. So they start to feel what fluency looks like. Do not move on from this process, this CVC, whole word reading, until it is automatic. That's where these kids get lost, because they're not ready to think about advanced phonics. They have to automatize the decoding at this simple CVC level, otherwise they'll be forever stuck. So mastery is key, automaticity is key. Covered that. If a student makes an error, have them try again. If need be, if they absolutely are struggling with the word for some reason, you can have them touch and say out loud, but they are going to read the whole list or the whole sentence or the whole phrase again without having to do that, so that they finish by reading whole word in their head first before they say it out loud 100% accurately. Last piece that I want to talk about, and that should give us a couple minutes, I think, for questions, is eyes on the word. You will, now Callista did not demonstrate this, interestingly enough, but most of my sound by sound students, when they are sounding out a word, they will go touch each letter, b, at, and then when they look up and say the word whole, not looking at the print. And that's when they're not developing their mental orthographic image, because they're never associating that whole word bat with the letters B-A-T, because they have walked away from the letters B-A-T and are now just thinking about the sounds and making a word out of the sounds. And so it is really critical to have these students always look at the word. And the kids that normally look up, it's a habit, and it's going to take patience and practice on your part to change that habit. We have a wonderful article for free on our website, Eyes on the Word. I recommend you check it out. It gives some strategies for being able to work on that. The key is that even if the student thinks the word before they say it and reads it accurately, but they look up when they read the word, you can say, read it again, eyes on the word, immediately. That's how you change the habit. If you didn't tell them they needed to correct anything, they know they read it correctly, you just say, read again, eyes on the word. And then you can start to just say, eyes on the word, and they know that means, oh, I got to read it again. They'll get tired of reading it again, and they'll start to control that habit. You have to make it harder to do the bad habit than to do the good habit. And the way you do that is you make them do it again the correct way. And repeat, repeat, repeat. The key to all of this is going to be a lot of repeat, repeat. So I am going to just leave this up for a second and mention that we have 3 areas that you're going to work in simultaneously in not within a lesson. You're going to do what you need to do on the phonemic awareness. The most critical part of that will be the chaining, the sound chaining manipulation. You're going to fix any orthographic weaknesses, and then you're going to practice reading at the CVC level until they become accurate and fluent. So I think that leaves us ready for questions before I have to leave.
Hi, yes, and we do have many questions. We're not going to be able to get to
I'm
all.
sure.
One question was, how do the motions look different for a student who is left-handed, both in the video with Linda and some of the hand motions that you shared and showed?
Yes, if they're left-handed, they use their dominant hand. But if it's one of the motions that goes across in front of the body, which would be octopus, apple, and edge, we do want them to go left to right, just to reinforce the left-right motion. But they just use their dominant hand. So they're going to move in the same direction as the other students. It's just starting with their left hand instead of their right hand.
Okay. When you're teaching blending in a small group, how much wait time do you usually give the students? If it's a group, but compared to an individual student.
Yeah, you need to give as much as it takes. And that's why you do not do, when I say small group, you're doing, maximum 4, preferably 2 to 3, at least at the beginning of this, because they got to be able to do it in their own head. And and so maybe you do, if need be, if it's really a problem and if they're really slow, just pull one of them for a day and give them that time. And then the next time, try it with everybody back together again, or go to the next one that needs that time. It will get faster pretty quickly. It's just that initial that it could take that long.
If you're working with older students, how long would each session typically last?
Well, you need a minimum of 20 minutes, I would say. Half an hour would be better, and truthfully, an older student should be able to sustain 45 if need be.
Okay.
Fix it
And
faster.
I'm sorry. At what point do you suggest removing manipulatives?
You remove the manipulatives when you see that the students are not relying on them, and you use your judgment on that. But they'll be able to quickly point. They'll be able to quickly make the change. They'll start to be a little bit bored with using the manipulatives, and you'll sense it.
Okay. Someone earlier had asked when they are using their tiles or their blocks, they have letters on them, and would you recommend using tiles or blocks without letters when you're working on these skills?
For the phonemic awareness part, for the first part on that sheet, no print. Use anything that doesn't have print. It can be felts, blocks, tiles, but you don't want them thinking about print at that point. In fact, we're part of that process is getting kids that already know how to do some spelling and stuff, because these kids have been exposed to a lot of words. We want them to, and you saw Callista, she wanted to think about the spelling, and we want her to be able to do this phonemic awareness manipulation without having to think about the spelling, because that's the confusing part in English, is the spelling. But if we own, and this is why Kilpatrick tells us that we have to do this explicitly for the struggling students, is they need to be able to own the phonemic part, the sound part of words without the print, just have that solid, so that when they get to the confusing, potentially confusing part of multiple spellings for the same sound, the sound is not an issue.
Okay. And I think we are out of time, but I also wanted to let you know that there were many positive comments and thank yous for sharing the materials that you, and the handouts that you shared. So I want to share that information with you.
And please remember, people, I don't think I put my email up, but it's on the first slide in the handouts, but it's Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, at Readsters, READSTERS.com. And I won't get to all your questions today because I have a literary lunch group meeting right after this, but eventually, as soon as I can, I will answer any questions you have. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you for your time today. And thank you, Kim and Andra, for managing me so well. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to all who attended this session. This session was recorded and it will be available on the Patent YouTube channel in the near future.